policies. And even someone like Milei, who's railed against the Central Bank of Argentina, put a former central bank president in a top post in his cabinet. So these are choices that have been made by politicians. As someone who's been and reported from the ground on Argentina and on Argentinian politics, the corruption there, they just don't even, there's politicians in Argentina that don't even try to hide how corrupt they are. It's just flagrant in some instances in a way I've never experienced.
In her piece Bitcoin and the scheme to undermine financial privacy, investigative journalist Whitney Webb exposed a worldwide elite plan to dominate financial and economic policies affecting 8 billion people through a World Economic Forum-based public-private partnership. The FBI and US Department of Justice intelligence agencies from Israel and Britain are WFAC members. The SWIFT payment system, Amazon, Microsoft, and Bank of America are fighting cybercrime and preventing global cyber threats. WFAC proposes uniting commercial banks, financial authorities, and national security and law enforcement. Whitney warned that this relationship goes beyond cyber defense. This revolving door offers government agencies unrestricted access to private data through private entities, which use government power to develop laws that benefit them and expand their control. Everyone gains except the public, and we are all unwitting pawns in a disturbing power game and ultimate slavery. PAC demonstrates public-private partnership growth. UN Sustainable Development Goals aim to reduce poverty, hunger, gender, and other inequities and preserve the earth by transitioning to inexpensive, clean energy. Unfortunately, the same entities that produced these flaws are now expected to fix them. These measures are commonly supported by former CEOs of large financial companies working with governments and public organizations to save the world. Their debt imperialism proposal lets countries borrow forever if they hit the SDGs. In a recent interview with Peter McCormack on What Bitcoin Did, Channel Whitney highlights the dystopian nature of this public-private cooperation and aims to usher in a new period where these schemes are openly revealed and the global elite dominates the planet without oversight. Whitney thinks we're already seeing the beginning of this terrifying future.
In the case of Saudi Arabia dumping the petrodollar, you could argue that Mohammed bin Salman for some time has been moving away from the dollar well before that official announcement. Basically, when he came to power, he was trying to move Saudi Arabia to a post-oil economy. He launched his Vision 2030 plan and made overtures there that he was going to try and move Saudi Arabia away from oil and sort of make it a leader in the fourth industrial revolution, including in fintech. And we've also seen other big actors in Middle Eastern oil specifically, like in the United Arab Emirates, for example, do kind of essentially the same thing. So I think it's something that sort of has been planned for some time. And what's interesting is that MBS, as soon as he came to power and during the Trump administration, was very close to Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, who was also we know from emails that have since come out promoting the idea of stable coins, like an official US dollar stablecoin. He actually, I think it was a Sam Altman blog post that he shared with Steve Mnuchin of the Treasury Department, talking about, the USD coin, which, this is before Circle launched USDC, but interesting. So it's very possible that these discussions were being had some time ago, that it's not as recent as it may appear to be based on headlines that have been coming out. All I really want to add to that is that it's important to keep in mind that when the petrodollar system has been the standard for keeping the dollar the global or reserve currency, the US has gone to war and killed millions of people to defend that. One of the likely motivations, obviously there's more than one, but one of the key ones in invading Iraq, I would argue, was the fact that Saddam Hussein, not long before the invasion, had started selling oil in euros instead of dollars and made a lot more money, showing by example to other other OPEC members that they could make more money selling in different currencies than the dollar. And then of course you have the case of Libya in 2011, where Gaddafi was trying to move to a gold-backed currency called the dinar and was selling that to African countries, a lot of which either use dollars or they use, French financial stuff. And that's why you had the US and France essentially lead that regime change operation with devastating consequences for Libya, which used to be the safest country in Africa, then became the most dangerous, and has been cited as an example of or a reason for why immigration got so out of control in Europe after that point. So there are cases where the U.S. government, or rather U.S. empire, is willing to go to extreme lengths to defend the dollar. So the idea that they would just sit idly by and just let dollarization happen without having some sort of plan in the works, especially knowing that they couldn't keep this going indefinitely and that the world was going to move at some point to a post-oil economy. I think it's important to keep in mind that these people have been very serious and played very dirty and created insane instability just to keep the dollar the global reserve currency, because it gives a lot of advantages just to the US. And I fully feel that they intend to keep those advantages, even if it means a different system.
There's no doubt that Silicon Valley and intelligence agencies in the US and other countries, like Israel, work hand in hand. The Jeffrey Epstein trials proved this. Last year, JP Morgan Chase reached a $75 million settlement with the U.S. Virgin Islands over a lawsuit accusing the financial giant of helping Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking business for 15 years. The bank said the settlement doesn't involve admissions of liability and that it regrets any association with Epstein and would never have continued doing business with him if it thought he was using the bank in any way to commit heinous crimes. We all know what to make of that explanation. This bank and others are being fully mirrored with regulators and intelligence agencies in a nightmare scenario that is as dystopian as it gets. Whitney wrote in AEM that merging commercial banks, the regulators, and intelligence agencies is a nightmare scenario. But that's exactly what the World Economic Forum is pushing as a model for public-private partnerships. What's more, this policy was made with direct input from the Federal Reserve and the FDIC, which may be more important for American citizens. The U.S. Secret Service, the most important business banks in the country, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and let's go back to the interview. The establishment in this country backs these policies, and I can tell they plan to do everything they can to make them happen.
The economic policy, when Argentina was a military dictatorship, some of the financial policies they adopted were completely insane. You had a neoliberal in power during the 90s who was very bad for Argentina, in my opinion, Carlos Menem. And then you had their economic collapse in 2001, which, again, you could argue was a direct consequence of a lot of those policies, both of the dictatorship and of Menem's presidency. And then you have the IMF come in and all these other entities. And what they try and do after the 2001 economic collapse is have Argentina engage in things like debt for land swaps, debt for resources swaps. And this has been going on not just in Argentina, but lots of, most of Latin America, arguably, for a very long time. And it's a resource grab.
Yeah.
And, some of what we allude to in this piece and what we hope to allude to in an upcoming reports and a book is that a lot of the people that I've written about and that Mark's written about and that we've written about together are the engineers of that expressly. And by blowing out Latin American debt in the 80s and 90s, it was a way to basically yoke Latin America to the United States and, or more broadly, a lot of the transnational economic interests that are based in the United States, like Wall Street banks, for example. They engineered a lot of this. And so the situation in Argentina now didn't just come out of nowhere. And obviously Argentina's central bank has a lot of the blame, but that also didn't happen in a vacuum. Presidents appointed the heads of the central bank that made those policies. And even someone like Milei, who's railed against the Central Bank of Argentina, put a former central bank president in a top post in his cabinet. So these are choices that have been made by politicians. As someone who's been and reported from the ground on Argentina and on Argentinian politics, the corruption there, they just don't even, there's politicians in Argentina that don't even try to hide how corrupt they are. It's just flagrant in some instances in a way I've never experienced anywhere else in the entire world. So I honestly think that what's happening in Argentina, yes, those people have may need stable coins because of the current economic situation, but I think that it was engineered to be that way. They were engineered into that position. And who benefits from that? The same people that I would argue created the solution and created the problem. I just want to add really quick about dollarization. Mark and I feel like a lot of the goal of this is covert dollarization through stablecoins. And dollarization has happened in specific Latin American countries in the past, Ecuador, for example, El Salvador. And what happens then is that when they're dollarized, those countries lose their financial sovereignty. They become dependent on decisions of the Fed, and a lot of consequences come from that. So this is an effort by the same architects of even those instances in Ecuador and El Salvador to essentially foist the same thing on Latin America, but under a more, it doesn't seem like overt dollarization when it's stablecoins that aren't directly.
WF is charged with fighting cybercrime, but Whitney feels the ultimate goal is to deploy more control tools until the entire system is under their control. This global cult has been known to create the problem and then prefer a solution that's supposed to help everyone, such as a big doomsday cyber attack, and Inc. comes to rescue us. However, the WF and its allies, including several US government agencies, need a few things to surface before they can offer their dystopian solutions. Whitney warned her article to unite banks, regulators, and the national security state to eliminate global financial system fragmentation. With everything that has happened since Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, global financial instability may soon become a top concern for the common citizen. Whitney asks crucial questions: will we sleepwalk into a world of CBDCs where intelligence agencies, central banks, and commercial banks have fused into one Orwellian entity? Or will we fight the groups and institutions that have looted American wealth for well over a century and demand a return to the Constitution and the right to privacy not just financially but in all ways? What do you think about the giant public-private partnership threatening to swallow us? Call for more videos like this to improve the YouTube algorithm and develop the channel. Thanks for viewing.